So our first panel discussion for the day is on the topic, Unlocking India's Telco Ecosystem Value. So to lead the session, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us the country head for Intel, who comes with more than 26 years experience in Intel alone, and is positive about India scaling up and leading the digital revolution. She's also responsible for leading development and operations for Intel India, driving execution for innovation and for engineering teams across various business groups. A huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Ms. Nivruti Rai. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. I would now like to invite our distinguished panelists for this panel discussion, ladies and gentlemen. We have with us the Dean for Faculty Affairs Institute Chair Professor, Department of Electrical Engineering from IIT Bombay. He's also the founding member and chairman of TSDSI, that's Telecom Standards Development Society of India. A huge round of applause for Professor Abhay Karandikar. Joining them, we have with us the Vice President for Engineering at Flipkart, who's heading the Customer Shopping Experience Engineering, Catalog Engineering and FinTech Wing. Please put your hands together for Mr. Amar Nagaram. And joining them, we have the Service Provider CTO's Office for Cisco. His latest area of focus is 5G and edge compute, service automation and cloud-native architecture. Please put your hands together for Mr. Omar Sultan. Thank you so much. Ms. Rai, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. So I want to introduce myself. Some of the introduction you've already heard, but more important introduction is I've been with Intel for 26 years, and I have been a technology developer working on many technologies. I have been a technology implementer, so taking the technologies and working on different chips. But most importantly, I've also been a use case creator. We have the technology, we have a solution. What's the use case? And I realized that over the last 26 years of my journey with Intel, that the use case creation is not an easy one. Technology can be sitting and rusting and not get the excitement till a fantastic use case comes along. So I'll tell you, you heard from Akash about blockchain. How many of you know that blockchain was a solution of a very old computer science problem? Just like, everybody or most of you must have heard of traveling salesman problem. Byzantine general's problem is what was the one that created the solution, blockchain, decades ago. But guess what? It becomes exciting with Bitcoin, a use case. So I know the challenges, and that's why I feel it's very exciting to have all of you here together who are technology creators, product developers, and service providers as well. Along with, we heard from Ms. Sundarajan about the policy support we need. So I'm going to start with, everybody has heard data is the new oil. Don't need to say that. But how does data become oil? I want to share one quote with you, which was a very prevalent quote some 50, 60 years ago, which said, geography is destiny. Geography was destiny because when there were cities near the port, people could do trade, and that's how they made money. But today, the same phrase has become, connectivity is destiny. So unless we have a very intelligent, scalable connectivity, data cannot become oil. In 2003, Eric Schmidt from Alphabet saw a fantastic vision. He said, when network becomes as fast as processors, compute will be all across the network. He saw in 2003 the vision of distributed computing. So having said that, I have a few foils that I would like to share with you really quickly. Some of the use cases of Digital India you've already heard. You heard about retail. You heard about 3D printing that Matthew talked about, plastic to metal, but then to organs. So all of these verticals and technologies are leveraging digitization. But in the end, what is happening? Huge amount of data is being created. I'll just give you a statistic on by the time we are in 2020, there will be 50 billion devices, some 200 billion sensors, but most importantly, the amount of data which will be floating will be on the order of 150 zettabytes. Just for fun, can any of you tell me how many zeros are there in zettabytes? Sorry? Pretty close. 21. We are so used to giga with 9. I literally had to make sure that I was counting the right zeros. It's 21. That's the amount of data that will be floating. And that's the amount of connectivity and intelligence which is required to create the use cases. And like I told you, technology could be sitting and rusting till a fantastic use case comes along. And all of these use cases can be built when we have devices connected through a network connectivity, and then use cases built on top of it. Network transformation, I talked about how critical network transformation is, because networks is what is going to make the data into oil. Few things that all of us have been hearing since morning that have been happening for the transformation. One is our efforts to make the networks intelligent. And we heard the Radis' CEO call about that SDN and FE has become very prevalent buzzwords. So that is one initiative that's already happening, making the network intelligent. Second is open source. Open source is absolutely essential, and I'll share with you why. And lastly, standardization. These three are critical ingredients for our network. Before that, data will not become oil. I talked a little bit about open source. You've been hearing since morning, so I really don't have to explain much. But open source enables focus to build the use case. Otherwise, your technology better rust. Second thing, it enables scale. Most importantly, it enables innovation, because no one person is smarter than the collective intelligence. And if the collective intelligence is available on cost, that is what open source enables us. I just want to tell you that Intel heavily is investing in enabling open source. UNAP, you heard. In Amsterdam, significant contribution came from Intel, as well as many of you over here. And we are completely believing that that's the way to go, looking into the future. I just want to finish with open source requires investment now. It requires optimization for a certain use case, and it requires us to come together, because remember, standardization is key. I want to just finish with one quote. This is an economist in United States. I'm not an economist by degree, but I just love this economist's book. It says for any country, for any company, for any state, whatever have you, to grow, there are three critical ingredients: innovation, entrepreneurship, and policy. And I'm very happy to say that all of us are here driving all of those three things. So setting this overview, I would like to begin with my panel and talk to my esteemed panelists. So as Abhi was introduced, can you hear me? Yeah. So as Abhi was introduced, he's not just the Dean for IIT Mumbai, but he's also the chairperson for TSDSI. My question to you, Abhay, would be that, you are a very prominent academician. You are a staunch believer of open source. community and driving innovation. What have you already done in this space from the academician perspective? What do you believe we need to do as India, considering Indian situation? And I also want to add the flavor is, when me as Intel work with IITs, it happens that all of the engagement comes from US. As a result, a lot of the Indian context is missed out. So in your answer, just add to that the Indian challenges and what you believe needs to be done and what you're doing.
So I think, thank you very much. I'll just, before I answer, these three questions, let me just tell you that today's technology landscapes, in the last 20 years in the telecom technology, maybe in 80s and 90s, lot of innovations that have happened were mostly focused on what we will normally call as the physical layer innovations. And if you really see now in the 90s, what has happened is that from the communication standpoint, we have really reached the Shannon's limit. And from signal processing and physical layer processing, there is not much that can be done. And therefore, in order to improve the quality of experience and customer's experience, the focus is really more on networks layer and applications layers. Networks are getting commoditized, and also, as a result of commoditization of the networks, and more innovations are coming at the networks and applications and services layers, most of the innovations which are happening have the potential of happening it through, the open source community. I think, and that is the important thing to understand. And here is an opportunity, we believe, for Indian academics to play as well. So far, we have seen that Indian academia and Indian ecosystems have faced a lot of barriers to innovations, and one of the barriers that had really come to innovations and standardization was that in India's representation on the global telecom standardization landscape was almost nil. There was hardly any participation and which could take Indian requirements at the global telecom landscapes. All those barriers are really slowly, one by one, have been demolished. Now, of course, we not only have a sizable presence in the standards bodies as well, reflecting the Indian requirements, but we also have now a significant academic participations, both in terms of innovations and standardizations. So I believe that there is a lot of opportunity from the Indian academia to play a significant role in taking forward the innovations and driving some of the innovations that are happening in the today's digital world. And it is more so irrelevant in the Indian context, where we yet do not have a very strong ecosystem of Indian companies or large number of Indian startups that exist in the US, where most of the innovations are basically being driven by industries and startups and corporates. That lead actually could take place, that lead could actually be taken by the Indian academia till we reach a point where most of the innovations are then being driven by the industry. So I see there is a lot of opportunity for academia to play a significant role. As far as we are concerned, both from IIT Bombay side and the other IITs and academia, we have been working on many joint collaborative projects. Many of them were in the research domain, which were from building large-scale simulators. For example, we still have in the open source a very large-scale simulator which is calibrated, for example, with the 3GPP methodology which exists today in the open domain, which was a collaborative efforts with IIT Bombay, IIT Madras, IIT Hyderabad, which exists today. So those were mostly the projects which were there for the research and the standardization purposes. But now we are working on some large-scale projects and it is possible now because most of the hardware is now commercially available off the shelf and general purpose hardware, and we can almost build the entire network ecosystem by just doing the softwareization of the network. So there is a huge opportunity. And from our academia as well as from TSDSI's perspective, I believe that we have a significant role to play, and I think we will continue to play that.
What role do you think that open compute platform hardware could play in this, unlocking of the value?
Yeah. So as I said that now, earlier all innovations were built using the special purpose ASICs or a special purpose hardware, and now with networks getting commoditized and networks getting what we can call as softwareized, either through SDN or NFV a network, instead of becoming a very complex hierarchical network, essentially becoming a flat IP networks. Most of the networks innovations are getting built on general purpose open compute platform. And that is where I see that there is a huge opportunity for Indian academia and Indian industry to contribute to this. We are no longer living in an era where the network innovations are getting built only using specialized general purpose ASICs or hardware, where therefore, not only the innovation system is closed, but only those who have access to design and fabrications of such specialized hardware will be able to innovate. Now that barrier has really broken down.
Thank you, Abhay. One question to you, Amar, is, firstly, I want to say, Abhay was talking about, we don't have very many startups that could, contribute and create. I will tell you that you are one of the most celebrated companies in Intel, especially for Intel India, because you put us on the map for business development in India. Otherwise, till then, we were only R&D. So thank you very much, Amar.
Thank you.
But my question to you is, you are a fantastic example of someone who has lived through this open source journey. You have consumed, you have created, leveraged, and became the giant that you are. Can you tell us how India, which is synonymous to software, how India can be leveraged to contribute more towards, what Abhay was talking about? Can you share with us, how can you and the rest of us unleash the Indian software community to create this open software and platforms?
Sure. I'll actually start off with how the open source technology shaped the journey of Flipkart. But before I go there, how many of you shop on Flipkart? How many of you shop Flipkart on a mobile phone? How many of you have Flipkart app installed? I'll tell you why I'm asking these questions later. 10 years ago, when Flipkart started its journey, by two engineers who were very passionate and who were aspirational to do a successful startup out of this country, the only thing they had in their favor was open source technologies. Neither the market was ready, nor the infrastructure, nor the investing community was actually ready to bet on an e-commerce company 10 years ago. I think that is the reason why open source is actually part of our culture. Everything we do at Flipkart, we keep asking the question. Every time we encounter a new problem, and every time we solve a new problem, we actually ask ourselves, do we want the rest of the community to go through the same problem solving? Which is why we are actually committed to contributing it back to the open source community. In fact, through the last 10 years, this is actually in line with what you were asking. Through the last 10 years, there were many challenges Flipkart faced. There were many ups and downs. I think of many things that propelled us, fueled us through this journey, the two most important things was our great talent and the open source technology. And these two are actually related to one another. I'll actually walk you through a couple of examples of how Indian ecosystem challenges propelled us to innovate, which also led to a journey of us contributing back to open source community. 2014 Big Billion Days. Any of you guys remember what happened? Not a proud moment for us, but definitely a great learning experience for us. In fact, when we look back, there are many things. In fact, the call that we got from Ministry of Railways at 8:30 in the morning saying, "What are you guys doing? All the payment gateways in the countries are down. People are not able to book Tatkal anymore." And we didn't even know that we would actually go to that scale. Anyway, the problem statement that came out was none of the data centers in the country could actually tailor to our needs. So we actually went on to build our own data center completely on open source technology. In fact, one of the biggest innovations that came out of Flipkart was a software load balancer, completely based on open source technologies and the white papers that came from the likes of Google and Facebook. One more thing that happened, the reason why I was asking this question was, as India progressed towards mobile and there's more of mobile internet penetration that was happening, we also sensed an opportunity that the next wave of commerce is going to happen on the mobile phones, which is when we shifted our focus to mobile apps. But sooner we realized having a mobile app is not just going to be enough for us to win this. Some of the data points around, we are actually dealing in an economy where most of the devices are under $150, and the network, thanks to Jio, it changed significantly, but before that, the network, 67% of the active internet base was on 2G. And the most important thing was there were only 7 apps on a device that users were actually focusing to. And in the 7 apps, you have WhatsApp, Truecaller, Facebook, and then you have browser, games, all of it, which only leaves 1 to 2 apps for an e-commerce app to even sustain. What we actually saw was an opportunity. We invested into a technology which enabled us to send an app over the wire, which people don't have to install. That actually led us to the world's first progressive web app. We worked with Google. We launched the world's first progressive web app. We contributed it back to the community on how, in fact, a lot of our learnings were bundled into an open source package, and we contributed back to the community. The reason why I'm actually calling out these examples are when we contributed back to the community, we attracted really great talent. And this kind of became a flywheel for us. In fact, today, Flipkart is one of the major destinations for a lot of Indians who are wanting to come back to India, who want to work with us on these problems. The unique opportunity India is posing to the developers is as and when we are actually, in fact, I think it was Mr. Ambani who was mentioning it, underserved and unserved sections of the country. It's not a challenge, it's an opportunity. And with the opportunity, there is a space for innovation. And in that innovation lies the need to actually do something that was not done before, which is where we are also striving. We are also pushing our technology. We are contributing back to that community, attracting the talent. So very soon, the map that Mr. Adrian was actually presenting this morning about the consumption or the contribution to open source, India would be a very thick green there. We hope for it.
Absolutely. So, Amar, just one quick second question for you. I would like you to reimagine the fate of the companies, and I will not add Flipkart to it, but reimagine the future of the companies like Wikipedia, like Amazon and Google, if open source platform and software were not there.
If open source software?
And platforms were not there available to them.
If it wasn't available to them, what would be the fate of these companies? It's actually hard to imagine a world without open source technologies.
That's exactly why my question was.
Yeah. Even Amazon would have not become Amazon. Google would have not become Google. I mean, of course, Wikipedia is a source of a lot of knowledge today. Yeah, I cannot imagine a world without open source.
Bottom line, you're saying those companies wouldn't beat them if open source was not there.
None of the unicorns that we actually see today, and none of the established players would have existed if it wasn't the intent of sharing their learnings, which is what open source is all about. We're not keeping our learnings to ourselves, we're actually sharing it with the community. If that sharing does not exist, not any single player can solve all the problems of the world.
I completely agree. That's why my point was, no one person is smarter than the collective intelligence which is contributing to the open source. Thank you. So, Omar, my question to you, since you are the CTO for the service providers in Cisco, my question to you is, what would your advice and guidance be to our service providers to create maximum value based on your understanding, your experience, and your learning?
Thank you. So, good service, good open source practices to stand on the shoulders of others. And, I think the folks we work through, tier one service providers globally, web providers, there are probably like 3 lessons I think we could bring forward to India as it starts to embark on this digitization journey and looking at open source. The first one is if you look at all these great these open source projects, you ask the question about these first generation web companies. They built almost their entire solution, whether it was Facebook or Twitter or any of these things, on the LAMP stack. So it was a common set of technologies they all used and they adapted them to their own purposes. And the same is true today. If you're looking at ONAP or OCP or Cord or any of these things, I think as a company, as a country, you still need to own the architecture yourself. You need to be the one that designs the architecture, designs a framework. You should look at open source projects, like a recipe in a pantry. You have a lot of things you can choose from, but ultimately you need to be the chef, or you need to pay someone else to cook it for you. But at the same time, you need to be the one that maintains that, because at the end of the day, as you look to grow your business or you look to scale your business, you're really the only one that understands what your needs are, what your priorities are, and that's really not something you can outsource to someone else or turn over. The corollary to that is if you look at the companies that have been most successful, they don't have religion about open source. They can be virulently pro-open source, and that's their strategy, but at the end of the day, they focus on what works. They focus on, they focus on delivering the capabilities they need in a time frame that's meaningful. So a lot of times when I talk with customers, we talk about open source, but we also talk about open frameworks and open architectures that end up being a hybrid of open source technologies and commercial technologies blending together, because sometimes that's the practical thing to do. The second is a matter of scale. So certainly India is an immense country, both in geographic scope as well as in terms of population. So that's kind of obvious. But I think of scale in a couple of different ways. The one is, if you're going to build a platform, it needs to be able to address the requirements of, say, a financial services company in Mumbai and a rural farmer in the interior. 2 very different use cases, 2 very different economic circumstances. But if you can build a platform and not create the next generation digital divide and have served and unserved, you need to kind of take those things into account. If you look at something like like Cisco has a Next Billion, unconnected program, Telecom Infra Project, is a cross-industry consortium that's really looked at, how do we, bring connectivity to locations that have traditionally been underserved, to populations that have been traditionally underserved because the technology has not been affordable or it's never made any kind of economic sense. So you need to look at scalability that way. The other piece is in terms of access. So how do you build platforms? How do you get academics and academia involved and meet the needs of a large enterprise company, a post-grad doing their doctoral dissertation, and the girl that's in high school and has read about this stuff and wants to play and build a career around that. So what are the tools and what are the what's the access? What's the support for all those different types of populations? And they need different things, but at the end of the day, they can't be ignored. Which is kind of, I guess, maybe the final thought is open source is like farming. It's not, you just can't throw some seeds out and pray. Some of the folks, especially the software developers in the audience, might disagree, but the technology is the easy part. Posting some code on GitHub is not the end. It's really the start of the journey. It's what kind of community can you build? How do you get committed diversity? How do you support developers? How do you support people that want to take your code and, as you say, make actual use cases? I talk a lot about how do you convert unicorns to plow horses. And that's when the technology goes from being cool and interesting to, okay, this just made someone's life better, or this generated this helps us generate revenue or get services turned around faster. So as you're looking to embark on some sort of open source or open source platform journey, get used to the idea of giving back. It's not just about consuming, it's as much about contributing. And really, it's not like, my Cisco folks in the audience will laugh about this. It's not, if something's not working, it's not about, someone should fix this or someone should do something about this. Someone's probably going to be you. And that's just, get used to that kind of that mindset.
Completely agree with you. It's not about, reducing CapEx, OpEx, or ARPU, increasing ARPU. It's about the value. Mm-hmm. So one quick question, and then we will go through, other people also answering the question. But this one is for you, Omar. Mobile and internet data is telling me that 80 to 90% of data is video or media or multimedia. What kind of challenges do you see or technology development do you see that will be required for this kind of data looking in the future?
I think we see a scale that looks like this, and I think we just have some fundamental scaling issues in terms of how to handle that. I think on the consumption side, it's how do I get video to everyone that wants it and make sure they have a good experience. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're a company like Geo, the thing your business lives and dies on is your subscriber experience, and how do you make sure you have a subscriber experience that is meaningful and your subscribers are happy with, and still feasible from a technology and a financial perspective. I think the reverse of that is we're going from, we've always worried about asymmetric bandwidth. You worry about your download speed. You very seldom worry about your upload speed. But as we look at IoT, connected cars, connected sheep, all those sorts of things, we start to see as much data being created and moved up into somewhere as is being pushed down. So as you start to design systems around that, you need to find ways to effectively scale your aggregation and your movement of that data. Where how do you bring it in, and then what do you do with it once you've collected it? And I think at least those are the two near-term challenges.
Got it. Visual compute, etc.
Yes.
So now I have two questions which I would really like each one of you to answer, and very quickly, no more than one sentence, and we'll start with Abhay. Abhay, the two questions are, one is from India perspective, what are the challenges do you see in really pushing open source? Second, do you truly believe that open source is indeed do-it-yourself? Or do you believe that it needs to support a lot of, SI support, or is it truly do-it-yourself? And I would like each one of you to give quick answers, and then we'll solicit one or two questions from the audience.
Yeah. So I think the challenges, so your first question was, what are the challenges in terms of the open source from the India, in the Indian context? So I think the major challenges is in terms of open source development, as Umar just said, is it is not just, you throw the seeds and then, you can do the farming. It is more in terms of bringing out about a systematic contribution and a systematic, collaborative development across all the innovators and the academia, so that it can result in some large-scale contributions to the open source community, what Amar was talking, and where we can say that India can be seen as the leader. There is a lot of opportunity, and as I said, the opportunity is there because most of the and the opportunity is in terms of making some fundamental contributions, because now it is not just in terms of writing some applications, but in terms of really making fundamental contributions at the network layers. There lies an opportunity because the technology is moving in that directions. So I think the major challenge is in terms of how we can bring about these innovations more disciplined, scalable, and also conform to some standardized approaches. So we will need to bring in some open source standardization aspects as well, so that we have a very systematic scaling of the efforts leading to a large scale implementation which really disrupt the innovations.
And very quickly, do you believe it's do-it-yourself?
Sorry?
The open source, is it do-it-yourself kind of?
No, so that's what I said. It is do-it-yourself, of course, but it's not just do-it-yourself. You have to collaborate with others and also conform to some discipline that is some standard.
So in short, we need support and we need standardization.
Yes.
Amar?
So the biggest challenge I believe is the culture within the organization. I agree with Mr. Omar. It cannot just be a CapEx OpEx thing. It has to be the cultural issue, which is what we believe in. And I agree with Doctor's suggestion of a guiding body to normalize the efforts more than anything, to normalize the efforts and bring that standard face of open source out of India to the external world. If we get this right, if every organization actually signs up for this kind of culture and also adheres or make them committed to a guiding body, I think we would be a very strong player in contributing back to the open source community. Coming to your second question, it's actually more than do it yourself, it's doing it with the community. It's the inclusive style of working. Again, I'll go back to the point, like not one company and not a single company can actually solve all the problems. We have to work with the community, and it's actually it's very surprising to see how many others who are not even directly related to your problem statement are willing to solve the problem for you. So as long as you have that inclusive kind of mindset, open source will actually flourish.
Omar?
So I think in terms of biggest impediment, I think there's still not huge, great understanding about what open source is. I think a lot of times there are misconceptions. Is it a licensing scheme? Is it development? Is it just about free software? Or what's the big deal? To the second question, I think it depends. There are companies like Geo or Facebook as examples that can completely do it themselves. But they have the resources to do it, and it makes sense. And not everyone's in that position. They don't have the resources. Maybe that's not the investment they want to make. So I think at the end of the day, you kind of need the spectrum of things, from everyone that wants to roll up their sleeves and really get under the hood, to someone that I just want to use Flipkart. I'm going to go buy stuff. I don't want to build, I don't want to have to write a shopping cart in the process. So you need some examples where folks can pick where they want to engage.
Thank you. So your answer is, we need a spectrum of, support as well as solutions.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have time for a couple of questions? Ramya? Okay. So we will take 2 questions. And you must remember that there are awards for the questions. So make sure your question is the best one. Could you help yourself with a mic?
The mic.
Oh, there's a question over there.
Or I could give you if you come up front.
Hi, I'm Ravi from Geo.
Okay. My name is Prashant Ranjalkar. We are an open source based company specialized in the database services on PostgreSQL. The question is, when we are talking about the Postgres open source community, the first, while implementing or while adopting the open source technology, while developing the new application, basically we have seen the attitude saying that who will give the support? Okay. If suppose I am getting into anyhow the open source community is always be available for providing the support, but how does the enterprise application, their end customers will get benefited by having the enterprise support model? And how do they overcome with the challenge of the expertise from the market? Okay, this is the question number 1. The question number 2, so there is a challenge that from our educational systems, basically maybe not from the IITians, but at the education level, at the graduation BE Bachelor of Engineering level also, this open source community adoption is not seen as aggressive level, right? And that is the reason most of when the graduations are becoming out of the market, so they are again adopting the proprietary, well-known proprietary vendors and application, which doesn't leading towards getting the jobs. Because they are always be available in the jobs, but they are not available in the right expertise in the market. If the graduation, after completion of the graduation, if the engineer is adopting the open source technology, if he is well-known educated during the education systems, and then it becomes easy for him to get the job when he comes out of after 4 years of degree. But after 4 years of degree, because adoption is not that much aggressive at education level, so people are going towards the getting the classes from the outside market, and they are facing the challenges in getting the jobs.
Questions? The first one, I think I would like Omar to answer. He talked about, support, that, there is open source software available, but what is the support that, people can leverage? Is there any enterprise support? And the academia one, Abhay, we would like for you to answer. And it was a very long question, but basically, how do we leverage skills and all of that and make it relevant for jobs, etc.? That's the question. And Amar, if you'd like to add on to any of that, that would be great. So Omar, over to you.
Sure. So, that question really is kind of follows onto the last comment I made. Different folks need different levels of support. We heard this morning from a couple of companies that, their core product is open source, but their value that they bring to their customers is around, support, integration, QA, all those sorts of things. So you may deliver, you may build an architecture for your business based on open source components. But that doesn't mean you have to become an expert on everything. You may say, okay, I'm going to turn it over to this company that's going to do my testing, integration, validation, and I'm going to take my time and effort and invest it in my software that I go sell to customers, the services that I build that generate revenue for me. Others, they have scale or they have capabilities. It makes sense for them to want to do it themselves.
All right, thank you, Omar. Abhay?
I just want to say that a lot more needs to be done about the engineering educations in general in the country. So I don't want to go into details of that, but yes, I agree that it is not just the open source, but we need a lot more reforms in the engineering educations. So it's not the time really to tell you that what is really the prescription for that. So I don't want to be prescriptive, but I agree that we do have challenges.
We do have challenges. We have to make a lot of changes, etc. Amar, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I actually want to add to the first question, as might as well add to the question number 2. The first question, it really boils down to your appetite levels. When the way we actually operate, right? I'm just taking Flipkart as an example. We don't start with the technology. We start with the problem statement. We go through the solutioning. That's when we actually identify what is the closest solution out there, open source technology that can actually solve our problem. 7 out of 10 times, none of the existing software technologies actually solved our problem to the T. But what gives confidence for us is the fact that we can actually roll up our sleeves, go change the open source technology that is available out there to our needs. And particularly answering that question, the support is actually coming from the strongest community. Like many times when we had a blocker, we posted to the community. Yes, it is not as good as an enterprise support system, but the support that we got from the community was much bigger and much efficient in terms of the complexity of the problem that was getting solved. So it really boils down to the appetite of how much you want to actually be the differentiator rather than just be a consumer of the technology. On the second part, yes, there needs to be a lot of change that needs to happen. But what we do at Flipkart, again, what Mr. Squat was actually mentioning, there is this belief that Flipkart only hires from IITs and IIITs, which is not entirely true. We also go to tier 2 colleges and tier 3 colleges, and the only thing we ask from students is, if you have a GitHub profile, just send that link to us. We will reach out to you. So we're doing our part to incentivize students to do more than academics, to start contributing back, even the smallest tinkering that you can do with any of the open source technologies, just send us the URL.
Thank you. So since we already used up our 2 questions and plenty time, I want to end this panel with the dream that Matthew and many of us set out, that India needs to be a $7 trillion economy. India needs to see 10% GDP growth year on year. What we have to do is we have to work together. If that is our dream, we have to work together as India. Otherwise, somebody else will hire us to do it for them. And by the way, this is a quote from Dhirubhai Ambani. Thank you.
Thank you so much for an interesting and insightful panel discussion. Thank you once again. I'm sure due to paucity of time, we couldn't take some brilliant questions, for which I would request you to connect with our speakers offline a little later when we do take a break. But thank you once again. Thank you, Ms. Roy, for moderating this session really well. Thank you. Thank you so much. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we move forward to the next session. In fact, it's on open source and innovation engine for India's digital transformation. We're constantly using the word innovation, and that's what even this next section will be about. In fact, it is being presented by our speaker, by our dignitary, who comes with more than 27 years of experience. He spearheads Cisco's objective to be transformational partner to the government across states and cities and provide customers with the right foundation for their digital businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together. We have with us the President for Cisco India and SOC, Mr. Samir Garde. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm probably standing between you and lunch, so I'll make it fast. I'd like to thank everybody from Jio, especially Matthew, who gave us this opportunity to speak to all of you. We are extremely well joined at the hip, so to say, with Jio and what Jio has been able to do. You know, a word that has been used very often during the day today, and I think Matthew spoke about it quite a bit, was disruption. I personally feel, you know, from change to disruption, there is probably going to be a new word in either thesaurus or the Oxford Dictionary called Geo, which goes beyond disruption. Because I feel like you use the word Google, I Googled this, you're probably going to say I geoed him, or I geoed her, or I geoed this, or I geoed that. And that's what we are really looking at. You know, my background has been, you know, in the 27 years I've worked in 13 or 14 years in FMCG. So I sold stuff like Maggi noodles and washing machines, and then I came into the technology industry around 14 years ago. And one of the rules, in fact, it's not a rule, it was just an observation by Gordon Moore, which said that, you know, a chip will become twice as productive every 18 months. And I don't think he ever thought that it'll carry on for 50 years since he said that. But this is probably the only industry, the technology industry, is probably the only industry which has grown or disrupted 2 billion times in 50 years. 2 billion times, guys. You know, if you look at Gordon Moore's equation, the number of chips that you can put in, or the power of a chip today, is 2 billion times more than it was 50 years ago. 2 to the power of 31 to be precise. Now that's just hardware, right? But what we've been able to do on top of that 2 billion times of technology is all the applications which have developed on top of that. And in more recent times, I guess since the early 90s, a lot of open source has triggered that development and that pace of using that power of the chip beyond our imagination. In fact, right here in India, I would say, industries have got transformed, cities have got transformed, and our personal lives have got transformed by a lot of the people that we saw over here. I mean, Flipkart is a great example of disrupting an entire industry in India. Netflix, Hotstar, these are great examples of applications which have been developed using open source, which have disrupted entire industries. In fact, I was reading today in the morning that there is a startup now in Bangalore which is starting theaters for Netflix and Amazon Prime Video viewing. Can you believe that? So you can actually rent a theater to watch Netflix movies inside a theater. And you can rent it for around 1,300 rupees for 18 people for a couple of hours. Now that is amazing disruption. It basically means that the traditional cable industry, the traditional dish industry is going to get completely disrupted. Now somebody mentioned, I think Nivriti mentioned the fact that nearly 80% of that data that is being used is for video. And that's a disruption that is going to touch each of our lives. Now we look at what is happening in India, right? We are the second largest population of smartphones in the world at around 30 crores. I don't like using the word millions. 30 crores. We are a 130 crore population country, and we already have 30 crore smartphones. China has around 70 crore smartphones. Okay, 700 million or 70 crore smartphones. Last year, from a data point of view, India's consumption of data was 150 crores GBs per month. Okay, 150 crore GBs per month by 30 crore smartphones. So you can do the math. We are probably the second or the third largest consumer of data per capita now, after Sweden and a few other countries. And out of those 150 crores of GBs per month, close to 100 crore GB per month is done by one company, which is Jio. Okay. So out of 150 crore GBs per month, 100 crore GBs per month is going through the Jio network, which the Cisco team is enabling. Okay. That was the only plug I had. There's another thing which I've noticed, if you saw, there was a lot of talk about demonetization and all of those things, and I'm not going to go down that path, but just before demonetization, if I'm not mistaken, and Dr. Rai will correct me if I'm wrong, there were probably around 600 or 670 million digital transactions per year in India, or per month in India.
2.2 billion.
Right. It went up to 1 billion, and now we are talking about 2.2 billion digital transactions per month. Per day. Sorry. 2.2 billion digital transactions per day. And we are a 1.2 billion population country. Just think about the enormity of this. Now, I'm a business guy. I wouldn't call myself and categorize myself as a technology guy, okay? And I stay in Bangalore. I happen to be in Delhi, and I'll tell you the impact of these technologies. And I happen to be in Delhi. I had my parents' car. I didn't want to drive it myself, so I went on an app, and I got one of those hired drivers. He came, he took me around. I started talking to him, and I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Sir, my life is my smartphone." And I said, "Tell me more." So he says, I drive for around 4 or 5 hours a day, sometimes 6, 7 hours a day. And I used to have 5 artificial jewelry shops in the outskirts of Delhi. So he had these brick and mortar shops for artificial jewelry. and he was doing retail and wholesale, mostly wholesale of artificial jewelry. So I said, that's good. He said, sir, around 6 months ago, I closed down all my shops. And so I said, what happened? He said, my wife came up with this idea of selling artificial jewelry on WhatsApp. And today, he says, my artificial jewelry business is no longer a brick and mortar shop. It's called WhatsApp Jewelry Marketing. And he gave me a card for it, and I'll send you that card photograph at some point in time, or tweet it. It's just amazing. And today, between the two of them, they earn anywhere between 5,000 to 7,000 rupees a day. 5,000 to 7,000 rupees a day of net income, primarily because of this data revolution and all of the other things that have been developed on top of that. This is what the transformation of India is all about. It's about a digital India which is real for people who earn 5,000 to 6,000 rupees a day. And that is what, some of the things that I talked about, which is the development that we've done on top of very powerful hardware through open source applications, which has created this revolution. I'll give you another example, which is very interesting. And I'm sorry, I'm not talking about technology here, because I think the impact of technology and the impact of open source is a lot more real for all of us than the technology itself. And because I keep talking about technology anyway with most of our customers. I have a niece who's 13 years old, and her father has banned her from using more than 1 GB of data per month. Okay? And she stays next door to a house. They don't have Wi-Fi at home. They've just completely prison-walled them from a digital exposure. And I told her, you know what, I have 2 SIMs, and I have multiple data packages. I have a Geo SIM too, where I get 1 GB of data per day. Plus I have Wi-Fi, approximately 1,200 GBs at home. So today, I am GB mama for her. The point I'm trying to make is, there is a massive transformation going on at every level in various places. Another place which I've seen, and I think open source has moved from what I call from the bedroom to the boardroom. When I say bedroom, I really mean, it was someone who was doing it on his own, along with a community which was not visible to him, to places like Flipkart, which are, boardroom conversations now. It obviously fosters innovation, getting more people to contribute to digital solutions. Community contributed software to build scalable digital platforms for cities. For example, Cisco has something called a city digital platform, or Kinetic. We call it Kinetic, which is entirely based on open source platforms and is got multiple open APIs to talk to at least 100 applications which can run on that platform. I think with a majority of our population under the age of 30, and I'm getting the time up signal over there, so I won't keep you away from your lunch. With the majority of our population under 30, we have a responsibility towards India's younger demographics, building the 21st century skill set to drive innovation. And to develop sustainable infrastructures, to inspire and connect students to pursue STEM. And I completely agree with the question that was asked. I think it's important that we encourage students in engineering colleges to tinker with open source technologies. And I liked what Amar mentioned, that send us your GitHub profiles. Don't bother sending your LinkedIn profiles and all of those things. Today's world, a GitHub profile is more than enough. And I think we need to invest and enable a digitally ready workforce to access these opportunities. I personally feel, and I think somebody presented right up front today, that India is not even in the top 10 countries as far as open source contributions are concerned. With the kind of revolution that I spoke about, and with the kind of opportunity that India presents, I don't see any reason why we will not be in the top 5 in the next 3 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Garde. A fabulous talk indeed on the impact of technology as well as open source. I think we definitely connected over the point that we are all genie mamas and mommies for our respective nephews and nieces. Do we agree on that? Right? We all are over here. So thank you so much for that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure as we're giving you food for thought, your thoughts are on food instead. But we'll have to park the thought for some time because we have an interesting presentation coming up. In fact, we are honored to have with us the National Cybersecurity Coordinator for Government of India, who's in fact the first NCSC at the Office of Prime Minister of India since March 2015 with over 30 years of work experience. Please put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, for Dr. Gulshan Rai. That's fine, sir. Please join us. No, but please do join us. We could continue with a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. True, that was the idea, but we'll go ahead with...
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I must apologize. I was to reach here 10 o'clock in the morning and everything was fine, but suddenly the plane started and there was a fog. We were on the runway for more than 2.5 hours there. And that is the reason and that I got delayed, and I think impact has come that all of you have been delayed for the lunch. And that's why I feel very apologetic. And also that since I have been, I am conscious of the fact of the delayed lunch. So I will also be hurrying up what all I have to say. And I'm sure most of the things must have been discussed in the various sessions today. I also would like to thank Geo, particularly Matthews, for inviting me and bearing me also, adjusting me at this point of a time. I was supposed to come yesterday night, but then there were issues there. Friends, I was listening the speakers since the time I came here half an hour ago. The panel discussion and my friend Samir also there. The one point which the moderator of the earlier panel, I think from Intel, what should be done to promote open source? That was a question which was bothering me and bugging my mind. Do we have to do something when the open source is so much deep into our society there? Anyway, this question I will deal, why I am saying so, I will deal with because panelist after panelist and speaker, including the last speaker, Samir also, in a way he said that is already deep into our system there. But let us see what has happened. When I see myself, I have grown with the age, as she said, my 30 years of experience, she said, I have grown with the sector. And there have been mind-boggling kind of a development, technological innovations during the last 30 years in this area. Today, as Samir said, the kind of a data which is flowing that. And I remember the day when it was in the year 2000, I was sent to Department of Telecommunication. You will recall that time the VSNL had the monopoly on the gateways there. and we were trying to break the monopoly of the gateways. We said it should be, the satellite transponder need to be hired to Department of Space. The landline kind of a communication need to be hired from BSNL. Lease line also, there will be so many issues were there. And I was told, we said, demonopolize it, keep it open there. And then the member services, Mr. Saran, late Mr. Saran, who is no more there today, he said, where is the market? The total outflow of data from the submarine cable, it used to be flag only or the CME-V2, kind of CME-V1, CME-V2, is hardly 1 gigabits per second. That's the transfer of flow. If you look at today what is happening, and the Samir gave the indication there, the traffic going outside the country is much more than the traffic which is flowing inside the country. And the people may give the reason also that many of them, many of those things are more Google searching and that kind of a thing, WhatsApp and that kind of a things may be there. But the fact of the life is that the traffic has grown up. The cables, every submarine cable you can think is landing in India. We have a huge traffic going from Pacific route, Atlantic route there, and everything is becoming a data. That's a major mind-boggling kind of a thing has happened. Internet users, we are the second largest internet users. We will be crossing 600 million in March 2018. Mobile phone, you know that we have crossed 1 billion number some time ago there. And yesterday I was surprised, I was taking a review. The Department of Telecommunication was talking about, together with the IT Ministry, was talking about the promotion of IPv6 there. And the facts and figure which the IT Ministry presented, it said that the traffic on the IPv6 IP addresses is much, much larger. They say 25% of the total traffic is on IPv6 traffic. And that's where I support Samir. It was largely from the geo, which is IPv6 traffic. So mind-boggling kind of a thing has happened during the last 30 years, and one has to take into account the technologies like social media, search engine, mobile telephony, augmented virtual reality. These are the applications which has really transformed our ICT scenario and the cyber scenario in general there. What we see in the next 10 years, the technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, they are going to play a very dominant role. The time, I think there is a constraint of time, otherwise I'll give the kind of impact these technologies are going to make in general on every aspect which may be connected with any country or any country's ecosystem, whether it's the national security, economic security, cyber diplomacy or anything. In fact, the United Nations is also preparing to set up groups to deal with the issues concerning the artificial intelligence and the robotics there, because they want to control that. And there are separate issues. That's not the time there. But then these technologies are going to play a big role. At the same time, I also remember when we talked about the open source, in 1990 something, there was, Pradeep will remember that time, AT&T 5.4, 5.2 kernel was there. At the same time, there was a BSD, Berkeley, 4.2 or 4.4 kernel used to be there. Everyone in the country, all the PC manufacturers, someone started using the AT&T kernel and developing their application. They will say, someone will say Onyx, some will say Hikix, someone will say like this. That kind of a culture also went on. And when the BSD thing was not so important at that point of a time, but AT&T was very, very important. There were a email also, send mail, and some other email which the Sun was promoting on his Solaris. There also was an open source kind of a thing. Now, if you see from that scenario and what you see today, I cannot imagine any application, no matter it's a desktop, for the desktop or enterprise application, which does not have any component of the open source. So having seen that, I was told that 90% of the applications which are available has some or the other component of the open source. Even the software like Windows has some component of the open source, and the so-called the open source component, many of them have some component of the software which has come from the commercial application. There is hardly, it's very difficult to imagine any software development today or any enterprise application today without the open source component being embedded into the system. If this is a fact, then the question which I said, and I was pointing to Samir, and what do we need, what kind of a promotion we need for the open source kind of a thing. There was a panelist sitting that side. I think he made very relevant questions there, which I will deal with things there. That's one aspect of the development. Now, the subject I deal with is the security. Let us see the security aspect also there. Often we get into the debate, Windows versus open source, and when they meant the open source, they always mean the Linux there. It is also a fact today that we still do not have any rugged or reliable Linux or the Unix-based operating system which can operate on the desktop. We don't have any reliable which gives a service as good as this easy-to-use services as a window, and that could be the reason that Windows still controls the monopoly in the market there. But almost all commercial application has a open source. The applications like PHP, Apache, and software like that are predominantly used. MySQL are predominantly used. So when it comes to the security aspect, the security itself is becoming a more and more serious issue as we pass day by day. It is very difficult to say that the security will be more better if we use the proprietary or commercial product or we use the open source product there. I've been handling CERT. The vulnerabilities in the window-based system and the vulnerabilities in the open source-based systems, they almost run parallel, neck to neck each other. So I certainly will not try to buy the idea whether that the open source is less secure and the commercial software is more secure. There are reasons for the less and the more security, which one of the panelists in the last panel also tried to point it out towards that direction. What's the reason there? And as I said, the technologies which we are seeing the next 10 years, the whole will have a huge, large component of the open source built in there. There are very clear aspects. The trend which you see, the Android, which Micromax uses in India, or the Lava will use the Android. the Android operating system which Sony will use, Sony Ericsson will use, or the Google will use, or Samsung will use, the trend will show both of them have a Linux Android kernel there, but then certain implementation is different, which makes them slightly non-compatible issues comes up there among each other. Slight non-compatible issue comes up there. The issue remains here that everyone says that the open source is more secure because many eyes are watching it, and if there is any issue, somebody will plug it. That also was brought out here. Is it a fact? If that is a fact, PHP and Apache wouldn't have been JBoss, which would not have been so much vulnerabilities which we are finding this. In fact, most of the attacks in the financial sector which we are seeing, and the percentage is almost leading there, whether in India or abroad, the JBoss is one of the most attacking kind of a platform. If everyone is watching this vulnerability there and everyone is implementing the vulnerability there, then things would have been different. But the position is not so different. Vulnerabilities in the commercial software are as high as vulnerability in the things, but the difference comes up in the commercial, someone looks at it. When the WannaCry happened, the first it started in the Middle East. It went on for a long time in the Middle East, nobody noticed it. People started notice only when Microsoft issued the patch for the SMB version 1. And so is the case, the next case is also. So while many eyes are watching the open source, there are issues and which will come in the way for the more and more direct promotion of the open source, and it will bring challenges. Whatever the security challenge will come, open source will be used, it will continue to be used, and as I said, it's difficult to develop a software application without the components. And I was told that in a typical enterprise software, there are more than 150 open source components which find a place. The all internet banking applications has a open source encryption kind of a things there. Heartbleed was observed for a long time, and long time nobody patched up the Heartbleed. It's an open source component of the encryption internet banking software. Every software developer use that same component over there. So the issue lies it that we need to have an entrepreneurship along with the open source who should be able to scan the codes, puts the vulnerability on the website. There are in US you find large number of there. Scanning the code, notifying the vulnerabilities on the web, providing any help, providing the maintenance and support. It's recently only that JBoss and such software, Apache, they are coming with the support there. Of course, Red Hat Linux has been coming with the support for a long time there. So until and unless we need to provide such kind of a services and support, we are able to encourage in the market, which helps to maintain, notify the vulnerabilities, how to notify the vulnerabilities. Till the time we will have all those issues, and we will continue to have a serious cyber security issues. Of course, the usage will go and will keep on, more and more people will use. Because numbers are expanding, there is a pressure on performance, there is a pressure on the making the product cheaper there. So open source will find the way. There is no way. But we need to grow this kind of a structure, this kind of a facilities in the country, so that we are able to reap the benefit of the open source there. So what are the problem of the open source? Upgradation is a problem. Scanning patches, fixing the patches is a problem. Maintenance is a problem. And the proper documentation is a problem which we need to address all collectively. One can certainly correct the vulnerabilities once you know where to report, how to report, to whom to report. Those are the things there. As far as the government is concerned, the Ministry of Electronics and IT has encouraged, they have published the open source policy, and they encourage the government departments, government application of the open source. The big project like a JSTN or UIDI or any other project you talk about it, they have a strong and very significant component of the open source. They are built on the open source. Almost everyone, because of the cost reason also, they are more or less shifting to the MySQL kind of a database also. So friends, in my original presentation was little larger, but I don't want to come in the way. There are few things which we need to, collectively we need to adopt. One is that we have to use the latest version of the open source. We need to continuously check for the vulnerabilities, and particularly the zero-day vulnerabilities there, which are more in the open source system than the commercial software system. Verify the authenticity of the open source. And the removal of the unnecessary, unwanted libraries and the functions which operates on the open source. These are the few things which we need to follow to take the use of the open source at a higher plank than what we are having it. Open source is the future, and we'll all will be using open source, as it brings many benefits to us as compared to things. Now, if you look at the Microsoft is under pressure, they're also trying to put Windows and that kind of a platform on the open source. So I look forward, and in fact the government look forward to work with the industry to facilitate them what should be done to make the open source product to be more secure, rather than once the open source products are secure, we are able to set forward the structure which some of the things which I said. I am sure everyone in the country, every society will benefit, and ultimately it will be a win-win situation for all of us. I thank once again Geo for giving me opportunity, adjusting me at this time, and thank all of you for bearing with me, particularly during lunch time. Thank you very much.
Dr. Gulshan Rai, thank you very much. I'll personally come and thank him. Dr. Gulshan Rai, I know you were 2-3 hours delayed, and you came over all the way to come, and we want to especially thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Let's give him one more applause for having taken the time. Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate that. I know we have a panel next with none other than our own Mr. Rajan Matthews and team. I think we will try and do that quick. I will give it back to Ramya to do the needful.
Sure, thank you.
If anyone has one or two questions, I can answer if anyone has. Once they have so much waited for the lunch, if anyone has one or two questions, I can answer them.
Or if anyone has any questions.
One or two.
Yes.
Just 2 questions, please.
Just request you to keep the question short, please.
Yes, open source, we are open source leaders.
Beg pardon?
So we are into the open source service leaders, especially on the database side, PostgreSQL 1. And yes, I understand that there are vulnerabilities in the software, but what I think that missing part is that we are not able to get the right expertise in right place while adopting the open source, which might be the leading towards the vulnerability and security issues. If there are security issues were already part of the implementation, which got implemented, and the open source softwares will get upgraded continuously, maybe we can avoid these issues.
You see, I mean, that's a little much more involved kind of a things there. As I said, every software has number of components there today. There. The vulnerabilities may creep in at any point of a time. Just to save time, just to save cost, the developer pick one component from here, another component from here, and they join together. The security aspect is generally overlooked during the development phase there, and that results into the vulnerabilities into the system because you are building a heterogeneous kind of a code, and that creates a problem. And if this is a commercial software, someone is looking into those components there, all the components are interfaced properly. The open source, the problem, security issue comes up because developers are taking, just to save time, they're taking together, and no one knows where the components are there also. If you have to maintain a large application, enterprise application, no one knows where are the software, the open source components are there. What is the inventory of the open component in the enterprise application, and that results into that. And that's where I'm saying we need to create that kind of a infrastructure facilities in the country so that this expertise available. A common man will not bother, doesn't know what to see, what to do, what application has to see that. Or, I mean, normal tech savvy also will not be able to appreciate that. So we need to provide those facilities to that. The whole flavor of the open source after the Red Hat came with a service pack, Apache has come with a service pack, MySQL has come with a service pack, JBoss has come with a service pack, has become different there. So we need to create those kind of a thing, those facilities. And if you look at the Android on the Google, or Android on the Samsung, or Android on the Micromax, there are issues. If your Android crashes on the Micromax, then it's very difficult to load it also. The same thing doesn't come back, where the features are much different on those things. So they are able to, we need to create those kind of facilities to provide that.
So due to paucity of time, we're going to just restrict to one question for now. Thank you so much, Dr. Roy. Thank you once again. You can take the questions offline and can connect with our speakers when we take a break a little later. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving forward to a panel discussion, before which I request all of you to raise one hand in the air. Just one hand. Go ahead. Just raise your one hand in the air. Everybody, come on. Let's do that. Okay, now using only this one hand, clap. No. Clap. इसे भजन कहते हैं. Okay, yeah, we can see people do that. Go ahead. Yeah, collaboration, partnership. That's some claps for yourself, for for the patient understanding of the paucity of time that we have. And thank you so much, because that's where we call the word collaboration. And as Dr. Roy was talking about, the support that everyone requires for open source to be secure. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's move forward to a panel discussion, which will be led by the Director General of COIL. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Rajan Matthews. Thank you so much. Yes, I'd just like to invite the panelists also meanwhile. And this is, let's get first the Head of Community Architecture and Leadership, Red Hat. We have Mr. Harish Pillai. Thank you so much, panelists, for joining us. Could we have a huge round of applause? We also have Mr. Ashwini Rana, Head of Connectivity for Policy for Facebook. Joining them, we have Sunil Goyal, who is the Vice President Engineering for Paytm. And we have Mr. Sujit Bakshi, who is the President Corporate Affairs for Tech Mahindra. Over to you, sir.
So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. So without further ado, let's just get to the crux of the issue. The session, the topic is how open source and big data are driving big changes in network services, policy, and security transmission. So those are the critical areas that we want to be looking in. We have 25 minutes, and so I'm going to ask the panelists to restrict their comments to 4 so that we can open it up to some questions from the floor. So give us your thoughts. You know the areas that you've been looking at in these questions that have been there. There have been security, skilling issues, policy issues. So based on what you want to take a look at. So let's start with you, Ashwini. Ashwini again from Facebook. Tell us something from your perspective and from the company. Try and be practical because that's what we're looking at now. The practicality, we've gotten the higher level perspectives. So drill us down to what you're seeing at your company level in the open source area in these areas. Go ahead.
Thanks, Rajan. So Facebook is one of the beneficiary of open source based technology. And also I think now we are giving back to that ecosystem, and we have opened our lab space to new startup or new technology to come and test on our systems. So there are other initiatives also like TIP. Someone spoke about it. So Facebook is quite active on building some new technology through TIP and also strengthening the existing ecosystem in open source area. So primarily as our learning is that we borrowed many ideas from Open Compute Project, OCP. If in our data center the kind of scalability was required, that wasn't possible with the conventional methods. So when we adopted this OCP, it brought lots of benefit, not in commercial terms, but scalability point of view. So it is a tried, tested game which these big companies have used for addressing the growth, no doubt about it.
So thank you. Harish, going over to you, Red Hat, we've heard Gulshan talk about some of the challenges that come up on the security side. One of the good points he made was that there was really no real difference between open source and proprietary software with regard to vulnerabilities and security. That's kind of good news. I didn't expect that. One of the areas that most people, when they talk about open source, talk about, oh, you know, security is a vulnerability. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So tell us, from Red Hat's perspective, what are you seeing in terms of open source, maybe in the areas of security and embedded software? He talked again about the fact that on the enterprise side, there's so much that's in there. It's very hard to tell what's open source and what's proprietary. So please, tell us from your perspective what you're saying.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think it's very important to keep in mind an understanding of the process in how you do security. In order to do security, you need to understand what it is that you're trying to fix. If you have visibility into the source code, you can fix it. If you don't have visibility into the source code, you cannot fix it because you are dependent on somebody else who has the visibility to be able to do so. Now, what does Red Hat do in the open source world? We are a 100% open source company. Every single thing that we do is open source. We have been in business for over 25 years. We are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So we are an extremely public company from that perspective. And everything that we do is open. Now, if there is an issue with any of the components that we have, that we ship to our customers, we have to fix it in quick time. There is there's no way we can hide behind anything and delay any kind of response. And I'd like to highlight a specific thing that happened, the last few weeks, in the last 2-3 weeks. And this has nothing to do with the software. This has got to do with the problem with the hardware, the CPU itself. The two issues that have come up in the last couple of weeks, Spectre and Meltdown. The work that has gone into fixing it at the operating system level, because that's where you need to fix it until and unless you replace the CPU, is done in the open source community. Red Hat leads that charge. Every single thing that we have been doing in fixing it is publicly available. People can see exactly what's going on. Contribute your ideas in how else to fix it. The Spectre and the Meltdown bugs within the kernel, within the CPU itself. This is a hardware bug that we are fixing in software. It's not completely out of the woods yet, We're still working on it, but that's the demonstration of how you secure systems, and it can only have happened if it was an open source environment. So that's how Red Hat does it. We have always been completely upfront with every single component in terms of security. We fix it. 95% of severity 1 issues from a security perspective is fixed within 24 hours. The remaining 5% within the next 24 hours. So within 48 hours, severity 1 bugs are fixed because we can do it not only by us, it's with the community itself. So it's a very global, very public effort across the board to make it happen. So Red Hat has continuously been doing this because clearly our customers, our enterprise customers are the ones that we need to make sure that they are secure all the time. We know there will be some breaks, that's a given, software is software. But the way we do it is, we like to say, trying to set the gold standard so that others, we want to help others to get to that gold standard as well. It's not only for us.
So, thank you. So, coming over to you, you were the big name when demonetization happened, right? Everybody ran to figure out some way of paying their bills, and we saw a 30% plus spike in online transactions on the payment side. So, how are you using open source, and are there any security issues or anything else that you see from your end? Thank you, please.
Sure. So I think, yeah, demonetization was one bonus, but I think from a transaction standpoint, it might be 30%, but if you see from engineering standpoint, it was like the day it happened, it was like 4x kind of, and then everyone from engineering and everyone was up and running and kind of taking care of the systems. So as a company, as a startup, what happens is, I think if you have seen not just in payments, we've been trying to do almost every few weeks, you would see one new vertical, one particular use case getting launched on Paytm. And if it would have not been open source, we could not have actually gone that fast. Okay, and so even though, let's say, so within Paytm, it's more like we say there are multiple startups running within the same ecosystem and being able to really push on new and newer use cases. So yeah, security, obviously, I would say is always a challenge. But anyone, let's say, so I don't know how many, let's say, are hardcore engineers here in this room, but let's say if you study information security as a subject, the principle number 1 of information security is that security is not when you keep it private, okay? Unless if the security happens when everything is in public, okay? So let's say if you take public-private encryption and any cryptography, so you have the algorithms, everything are in public. Okay, and even then the system is not vulnerable, or you can figure out from a algorithm you can attack or not attack it. Okay, so I think so obviously I think, and second I think software is if you compare from a human psychology standpoint, it's as you write more software it gets more complicated. So whether you write even if you're in an enterprise or if you're writing in an open source community, as you grow, I think as you write more software, vulnerabilities are going to happen. You can't prevent them. Okay. Again, I think I would agree with some of the speakers in the past. Let's say there's certain thing that I think you get support from the open source community. Second, being for us, let's say being also a financial company, as well as looking at all different verticals, we have to be also more active into thinking, okay, so maybe whether from a support standpoint, because at the end of the day, even the vulnerability happens, so we would have something like, so what we need to do is, at our end, what we're doing is we're developing maybe fraud detection engines, maybe developing a lot of big data stuff, primarily how to say, okay, how do we understand things better? And one of the beliefs that I think is very, very ingrained, at least from a culture standpoint, that AI is going to be much more relevant, not just in doing something like recommendation systems, but actually in solving security problems, or maybe even detecting fraud, or so I think we have been trying to have a lot more dedicated teams within Paytm, trying to kind of work on them. Right now, in terms of contributing to open source, so I think one of the things that we've done is I think is also an understanding, let's say, unless there is not deep mentorship at the lower level, whether an engineer who comes in or maybe the kind of stuff that we've been doing is taking student community. Let's say we recently launched a Build for India campaign where we said students along with, and there could be mentors from Paytm engineering team, along with mentors from other, let's say, communities who could come together and work over sustained period, because it's not a one-off activity. Today I did one project and then it will get lost. So essentially what you need to do is, in open source, you need to kind of sustain it over a longer period of times. So one of the things we have been doing from a mentorship, kind of doing this mentorship, kind of clubbing engineers from PTM, clubbing students together, and then leading open source projects out from them. So that's, and taking problems that we have internally and taking that community to kind of build them up.
Thank you. Sujat, coming over to you. Tech Mahindra, what a pivot from tractors to cars and now high-tech stuff in software. What are you seeing in terms of open source, in terms of your consulting arrangements or the development of software? You folks are very big into this now. So tell us what you're seeing in terms of the use of open source in this area. And again, talk to us from a policy perspective as well. Are you seeing that there's enabling policy that is allowing us to be able to continue to ramp up to global levels in terms of volume, scale, in terms of reliability, in terms of the usefulness of the open source applications that we're developing? Please tell us.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, use that one.
I'll use that one. Thank you. With your permission, I'll just take a minute off because I think there's been very heavy discussions this morning. So need some light refreshment before lunch. So first is, it cost me $15 million to get this seat today. We just invested $15 million in Altiros in the startup, which is completely on open source, and we announced that $15 million investment in a stake this morning. So the first one, to make it light. Second was Mr. Sundararajan described two kind of people. One is underserved and one is unserved. The third category is ignorant staff. People like me don't even know how to make a PowerPoint. But today, all my transactions I do on my phone. That's a huge, that's the right indication of digital proliferation that is happening in this country. The ignorant is using the phone to do most of the work. And I think that's my lighter moment. On the government policies, in the last, Tech Mahindra, the company was not very active in that segment for the Indian business. None of the IT companies' revenues from India is more than 2%. And we at Tech Mahindra, the senior management, three of us, CP, Unnani, Vineet and myself, we sat down one day and we said that we are chasing the Mr. Brexit and Mr. Trump. And so much of our time and energy is getting spent there. And the whole world of the Unilevers and the Procter & Gamble is looking at 1.3 billion people and we're doing nothing about it. So we created a special unit to handle the India business. So I'm very close to the India business. I run that as a part of my portfolio. And I've seen the government tenders as Mahindras will choose where to work and where don't want to work. It has become transparent, become more digital, more transparent. But I think still the digital tenders, the tenders that come from the government, still does not specify open source. As a matter of fact, we just read between the lines, you are supposed to work in defined technology. So there is a contradiction in my mind, and I think the government is extremely progressive. I have raised this with the telecom minister, and I think there is a valid point in the government, valid point that government will see. I am very hopeful with the way the government is working. So that's the question. From a systems integrator like us, and I'm speaking in general for most of the companies, which are now looking at this market because you might say, what do you say about digital? The data penetration is mind-boggling numbers that we have heard since morning. So as a systems integrator, I think our job, two roles. As a systems integrator, if I don't look at the government contracts but the other contracts, I think open source. Today 90% of my revenue, whether in the fixed price or T&M revenue, actually has some touch of open source. 90% of revenue. 10,000 engineers as I speak today are getting trained on open source. We have in co-funded investments with Linux, and we have also co-funded a lab with AT&T in the US on open source. So Tech Mahindra, and I'm sure most of the other companies, are actively looking at open source as the faster, cheaper not necessarily secure, and Dr. Gulshan Rai being there, I'm sure this will be taken care of, is looking at open source, and there's no choice. It's a question of, it's necessary now. So that's my submission. I don't know whether I answered your question, because I started 1 minute with making the situation a lighter.
Yeah, but Sujit, you've mentioned one thing. Here is the MeitY, which is the IT department of the government, indicating that this is going to be the high-profile priority of the government, saying is that open source must be included in all government procurement as a priority, saying is that, look, if you can get it, you should use it, and then if you can't get it, then you look at proprietary software. So I'm surprised to hear you say that the government procurement policies themselves are not supporting the open source.
I mean, if you took, the proof is in eating the pudding, right? You look at all the tenders, whether smart city tenders or any of the tenders that is in the government, there is no special emphasis on open source. There is still some proprietary. At least if not on tender, when you go and speak to the IS officers or the guys who are making decisions, they would say, we would prefer you go with this product or this proprietary. There is it's a mindset change, but it's a necessary evil, in my opinion. That's what I would like to say. Yeah.
So let me come to the Red Hat issue. You know, the old days they used to say that if you bought IBM, you never got fired, right? So if you're moving into the open source area, is brand value quite there as yet? I mean, sure, Red Hat is there. Does that make a difference in terms of open source, in terms of support? Does that make a difference in terms of how consumers view the product itself or the application itself?
I think largely that is quite true. I mean, brand consciousness is it's a given trait in any industry. So we have to assume that that is the case. But I think the bigger issue also has got to do with understanding the variation when you talk about brand and what does a brand represent. And in our case, the brand Red Hat represents accountability when you deploy open source technology in your corporate environment, in your government environment, in your education environment, wherever it is that you deploy. So brand, therefore, has that value. Now, we also do, from a Red Hat point of view, we are currently working with a very large government agency in one of the states, which we can't mention until they officially announce it, to do training, to enable students to be able to do, this is the issue with those who are delivered and unavailable, right? So to cater for the students to make sure that the next generation is not this current generation of people who are getting into industry, is the one behind them, and even the ones behind them as well, to make sure that they understand what open source is. And so therefore, in some sense, the understanding of what the code is and what it can do, and then understanding how the business that makes this happen for the corporate environment. And that's where the Red Hat model, which, we are happy that there are other companies copying the same model of a subscription-based business model, makes a lot of sense, because now you have the understanding that, if I'm running a Red Hat environment, I have somebody backing me up. I have somebody making sure that my systems are secure, are scalable, are available, doing all the stuff that you need from an enterprise point of view. Because at the end of the day, the enterprise is accountable to their customers, to their shareholders, whoever it is. We back them up. And that's how the value, so the brand becomes an issue there.
So Harish, I've heard people say, this is just another way to rip off the programmer, right? You've got this in the Uber world, you've got this in the Airbnb world. All of these things take employees that had all these benefits and the support and pension plans or whatever contributory plans, and then you make them almost free enterprise type folks who are contributing their value and their services, and unless they're embedded in a company, obviously there's employees. But in this grander world, are we contributing this into this divide of the 1%er versus the 99, where you get the value, but you really don't transfer the value? Now, just recently, by the way, from our industry got slapped with an act which said, look, everybody who contributes to a song needs to get paid, right? And this became an act. So if you're a lyricist or a songwriter or whatever else, all of a sudden there's an act which says, every time I put Ghana onto somebody's, or music onto some consumer, I've got to pay equally to every participant. Now, what's the situation? Are we really taking care of the programmer in terms of the value they're creating and in terms of the monetized value to them? Is that going to be an issue as we move forward?
Okay, thank you for asking that question, because that is a fundamental reason why I still am with Red Hat.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. The reason is because when we take software from the open source community, whatever it may be, it could be, you know, OpenStack, it could be the Linux kernel, name it, whatever it may be, and we make it available for our enterprise customers. We do the additional engineering, additional testing, additional whatever it is, and we ship it to the customers. The fixes, the updates, the improvements, and whatever that we have done is fed back out to the open source community where we took it from. So we are not saying, oh, sorry, this is ours and you cannot have it, because that's going to kill the company. Because otherwise I won't be part of Red Hat, because I have my principles. I am not going to take something from somebody and make money out of it and not give something back. Whatever the something is. Not all the time is it about money. It's not all the time about the dollar symbol. It's also the opportunity to give back the code. I have improved this code that you just built. Take it and do whatever you want to do with it. Improve on it. Make a business out of it. Go for it. Do anything you want. That is the value that we bring. And Red Hat has, this is our fundamental core ethos. We cannot, and we will never shift from it, because that drives what we do. And as a result, we are a party and a player and on a peer-to-peer basis with the rest of the world as far as open source contributions are concerned. We are also an enterprise company, so we have that aspect to worry about, which is great, but it helps us to make sure that we are kept honest with the community. We cannot mess that up, and we will never do that.
That's good affirmation. Thank you very much. so that's resonated, Harry. Thank you. So let me come back to you, right? You highlighted this whole issue of the fact that you're going to the universities and pulling folks out. It's a fact that Indians seem to be underrepresented in the open source area, right? So we're hopefully correcting this. But what is a further underrepresentation is a number of women that are involved in this, right? I think the last time I looked at some statistic, it was like 1% of the total population is women. What are we going to do? I mean, 50% of our population, right, is this valuable resource that we have that are going to be, left out of this emerging trend and opportunity that we're seeing?
So this reminds me, like in my class in IIT, we just had only one girl.
So, yeah. Hopefully we're going to change this, right?
Yeah, I think, I think primarily, my perspective, I think it's also about the way we groom our kids. So being a father now, I think we as a society are very protectionist about our kids, okay? And especially, obviously, girl child. And my perspective is, let's say, and unless that doesn't change, today, let's say, even as a son, let's say if I go, okay, maybe the first thing was, okay, you need to get to a job. Or maybe you need to or which company you are joining, right? Rather than saying, okay, are you creating something? Okay. So unless as a culture, we don't change whether it's for, and that too applies for the girl child. I think unless that, let's say as a traditional, we don't change ourselves and we don't make that change happen for our kids, I think we will struggle to some extent. I think even as an open source, let's say as an engineer myself, done almost like 18-20 years into hardcore development, what I've seen is, let's say, so any contributor, let's say if you talk about Linux, if you talk about Git, okay, these were not done by communities as a start. Single person, Linux Torvalds, wrote something and published it. Okay, it's very similar to how startups work. There are only very few people initially who wrote a piece of software, publish it, and then there's what is passion. The only thing that kills is passion. They have a passion about something, and that passion comes because there is a support system.
So we need to get our young ladies to have more passion. Is that what it is?
Yes. So I think, and specifically also parents, I think.
Yeah. So in time-wise, but Harish, very quickly, I've been told that I only have a minute left and we just want to have a question or two. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that we recognize that there is a disparity of sexes, sex within the IT community, and what Red Hat is doing to address that specifically, we have the last 4 years or maybe it's 5 years now, something called the Women in Open Source Award. The idea here is to recognize women contributors from around the world, and we try and recognize them both from an academic perspective, from academia, as well as in the community and enterprise. So we have those two categories, and we'll be announcing this year's winners sometime in May. And I must acknowledge that, the winners in the last 3 years were ladies from India.
Oh.
So they were, I think they were from the academic environment, so there were 3 ladies from 3 different universities in India. Now that's what we want to do, is to create opportunities for role models, people who have done good stuff, and tell others, hey, you can do the same thing too. Look at them, they have been doing this. So I think that's what we try to do to address that issue with the gender gap.
Thank you, Harish. Our time's up, so I think we'll take some questions. Again, if you get the lights on, and very quickly, I know lunch is waiting for you folks, so a question or so. So there's a gentleman in the blue shirt there, so if you could have a microphone there, and let's take the question from him. And please keep it short. No statements, only questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. And since morning we have learned about a lot of disruptive technology. Over here onto the dais, I am partnering with Red Hat, competing and complementing sometime with Tech Mahindra. Just want to know that I belong to SME. After this all disruption, what will be a government policy, or what will be a policy from the members of the community? We will be geoed or we will be jeete raho?
Would you be geoed? All right, so it's already coming into the lexicon. So, panelists, anybody who wants to, talking about the SMEs, right? Would you be geoed, disrupted, whatever, as a result of what is happening in this area? Please, anybody want to respond very quickly? You be geoed. Is that what it is?
I don't
he actually addressed it to Red Hat, right? You had a question for Red Hat?
No, to all of you, but I think Red Hat could be more relevant, or maybe from Tech Mahindra.
Let me try and address this. I think what is very important to recognize is that you cannot wait and expect that you will never, or hope that you will never be geoed, for that matter, because you should be the one trying to geo yourself. Okay, because then and only then are you going to be keeping up to the pace of what you need to do. Otherwise, the game is lost. So SMEs are the hardest ones to deal with, because from where I come from, I'm from Singapore, and SMEs are the hardest group of people to engage to make sure that they don't become irrelevant. So to be geoed, I would say, is becoming irrelevant. And so in that sense, I think onus is on the SMEs to see what else am I missing, and don't be stuck in the only way that you know how to do something. There may be a different way. Be willing to learn and listen and adapt accordingly.
So thank you. Our time's up again. So with that, should we close up? So thank you very much. Please, and a round of applause to our esteemed panelists, and thanks.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for an interesting panel discussion there. Well, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we can have the smiles also back, because we're going to break for lunch. But before which, we just want to quickly announce the one best tweet. The second one we're going to announce after the lunch break. Are you excited to know who's won the best tweet? Yes, of course. So the winner is Viplav Valluri. Do we have Viplav? All right, please come on stage. Could I have Dr. Rai please join us on stage to present the prize to Viplav Valluri. His handle name is @LuckyViplav. One of his tweet is disruptive future equals open source plus open networks plus open data plus open minds plus open support plus open governance. Could we have a huge round of applause? Plus open security plus open innovation. Please, sir. Thank you. So he receives an iPhone X. You want to be the lucky winner? Start tweeting. Thank you so much, Dr. Rai, and congratulations, Viplav. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, let's break for lunch. Please do also note that the time has ended for the ideas to be sent. In fact, we have had some fabulous ideas coming in under Kaleidoscope to Innovation, your chance to ideate. Please note that the lunch is just for about 30 minutes. Make the best use of it. We have an AR/VR zone outside and an experience zone too. Please go ahead and experience it. There's fabulous stuff happening here at India Open Summit. So please go ahead and enjoy your lunch, ladies and gentlemen. 30 minutes, and after that we shall resume. Thank you.